Be so quiet. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about disaster recovery and system redundancy, and answer your questions about that when we get finished with it. So, here we go. So, to discuss this, system redundancies are measures to prevent or reduce system downtime, and disaster recovery are plans and actions to return to functionality in the event of a system failure. I think that's pretty straightforward. But what are we really talking about here? What is the word that we can put this to? And that's resilience. And resilience is a word that we use in Pharaohs quite a bit. We talk about how to manage change, how to manage recovery from concerns or problems that allow us to be a resilient company. It's a very hot topic with our inside of our culture. And that is what I thought when I got this together, and I had it all together as a presentation, and I presented it, and I finished up, and I said, you know, that there's something missing here. It's a key phrase here, and resilience is the phrase here. So Websters devised that as, you can see it there, the ability to become strong or healthy again after something bad happens, or the ability to return to its original shape after it's been pulled, stretched, bent, pressed, which at first I thought that's kind of silly, but then I thought about how people poke at the systems and tear them up over time. So that is how Webster's defines it, but in Pharaohs we define that as the ability to respond to an adverse situation in the healthiest way possible. Again, this is a culture thing with our company, and I thought it applied here very well. What it really comes down to is being prepared, right? What can you do to make sure that you're ready for that situation, whatever the situation may be? The first way to be resilient is to put measures in place to avoid adversity in the first place. So what's already in the system that we have the ability to have it allow it for a little bit of resilience anyway? The database proxy service is something that allows for some level of redundancy should the print server not be able to communicate with the database server. It will hold some transactional information. It will allow for some transactions to occur, and there are details about that. Some of you know, some of you may not. But it will reconcile those transactions when it is completed, assuming that it can complete a transaction in the first place. Offline billing for our communication with an external billing system, Seaboard, Blackboard, Cardsmith, the like, in the event that we are not able to communicate with those systems, it has the ability to do some level, based on the settings that you wish to give it, some level of offline transactions, and then tries to reconcile those when those systems come back online. Multiple servers can be a possible solution here, giving it so that if one print server goes down, you don't lose functionality across your entire environment. Queuing and changing the relationships of release stations and things like that across the different print servers is very helpful, so that perhaps just a few of if you lose a print server, some of the printing functionality in a building may be affected, but not the entire building, or the entire campus, or the entire location, if you have that capability. And I've even had some customers go to the level of putting 2 print queues on every client machine, a primary and a backup, so should the primary stop working, they can be instructed verbally to start using the backup print service, and it will still end up at least somewhere where they can release it. And that's what can be done with the product natively. So server environments that are relevant here, physical hardware, virtual environments, clustered environments, some notes on that. Physical hardware, many people are still using the physical hardware, and that's great. Most servers have the capability of having some redundancy built into them, being able to handle the failure of certain components, hard drives, fans, power supplies, net cards, things like that. Things that move tend to fail, and they will fail eventually. It's good to have some spares of those in the server that can take over in the event of the loss of one or more of those, and have some more on the shelf. Same spare parts. Even to the point of if you have multiple types of the same server, it's not a bad idea to have a separate chassis handy, so that if the system board conks out, you can quickly bring that online by moving the hard drives around. And then, of course, don't just think about the servers, think about printers, release stations, PS200s, anything of that nature. Make sure you have extras to deploy if you need to, as much as that makes sense. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a copier that you can just move around, but you can redirect traffic. Virtual environments, our products work well on VMware, Hyper-V, and each of those types of systems have some redundancy in their makeup, and many of you should be familiar with that and are capable of setting those up in such a way that the server isn't even aware if the underlying hardware has a problem. It moves from one part of the environment to another if it's set up that way. Some have had the instance of saying, well, what if we lose the entire data center and we need to move it to another data center across town? Major disaster, power failure, whatever it may be. Now, some of these power failure may be temporary enough that it's not something you're going to just up and move your data center, but in the event that you need to do that, in some cases, I have some notes here specifically about moving from one data center to another if that is on a different subnet and the servers are going to come up with the same names but different addresses because they need to function in that location. Be aware that your DNS system need to be edited so that they make so when the computers are making the call to the servers, they can find them again. And whenever possible, use host names if possible. If you really want it to be, if any of those devices are out there, and I know many of the IMFPs are significantly quicker and easier to set up with an IP address back to the server, that's fine. But if the IP address changes on the server because of this type of situation, even if the servers are back up and running, the stations aren't necessarily going to be back up and running. Clustered environments, the ability to use Microsoft Cluster Server. We do have that capability, and we work with that in an active-passive mode, meaning the services will bounce to a different server, but the other server is not to be active in the other way as well. So it's an active-passive, and it is primarily to increase uptime capabilities. So if you need to do maintenance on a server, you can move the services to another server, maintain that server, and then bounce them back, and then bring your updates on the other server if you need to. Or, of course, in the event of a failure of the first server, it will automatically fail over, we hope, right? So, in the event that the worst does happen, it's best to be prepared for that possibility. That's the other way to be resilient, is to prepare for that situation. So what's the most important thing here is to have a plan. How many of you have a plan in the case of a failure? And detailed? Is it tested, written, documented? Another important thing here is to cross-train. I know a lot of the folks here in the room are the person or the couple of people who manage the Pharaohs system in their environment. And if you're not there, then something goes haywire, you're going to be on the phone for hours trying to help them out, or they're going to be concerned because you're on a plane, right? Cross-train that information. Make sure they know what to do for various levels of failure. It could just be a printer's down, so you've got people dealing with that. It could be a major situation. Make sure that this information is out there. And I thoroughly, I've talked to some of you about that you have documented your plans, and that's great. I highly recommend keeping documentation on that and making sure people know where to find it in the event of a problem. So in the nature of a problem, I think a lot of people here are very good at troubleshooting problems, but the people will not necessarily report the problem as something that you will immediately pick up on. They'll just say, well, the Pharos is down, or it's not working, or printing's not working. Well, now you've got to go find out what they mean. Does that mean this printer's not working, or does it mean all of them aren't working? You've got to go find that out and see if you can figure out which piece of that is. So it's always good to have a checklist, right? Someone calls in with a problem, and it's this kind of a problem, so let me just walk through checking the services. Are they running? Are the servers pingable? Can I ping the printers from here? Can they find their way home? How big of a problem is this? Very important to consider, try to pinpoint what it is that's causing the problem. We do have some abilities to test certain components, right? Check to see if you can get to the database through other means. Can the server reach the database? Can you connect to external gateways? Whenever I set up a system, I typically leave a couple of batch files in place that says, okay, if I run this batch file, it's going to check and make sure that I get an OK or fail back from the Active Directory. I may have to put in a username and password for a moment to verify that, but I will know if the Active Directory gateway is running. Likewise, if I need to check something with Seaboard or Blackboard or other external billing systems, library management systems, anything of that nature, it allows me to know if the server can communicate with that external system because otherwise I'm going to spend all my time trying to figure out why the release station can't communicate with it, and I need to break that and figure out why that happens from this point to that point. If I know I'm getting a response back from Seaboard from the server, but I'm not getting it out of the station, now I know which direction to look. So consider that. How to prepare for these situations. At a minimum, I highly recommend that you keep regular backups of your database. When we install the product, I mentioned the other day, yesterday, it's been a long time, our system typically sets up an automatic backup that occurs at 1 o'clock in the morning every night, and you need to know where that file is, and it was not a bad idea to keep a periodic grab of that file somewhere else just in case. That is not just your information about transactions, but it's also the information about how your printers and release stations and servers are configured. That is a great thing to keep a handy copy of. So even if you needed to go back to an earlier copy because of some corruption you discovered in the past few days, you should be able to find that and get that back. Or keep backups using other external systems that you may have in place. I also mentioned registry keys here. The servers have a series of registry keys that are typically under local machine software Pharos or Windows on Windows 6432 Pharaohs. That location, if you can snap a quick copy of that when your servers are established, it's not a bad idea to have that. If you lose the configuration of your external gateway, a lot of that information is stored in the registry, and some of that's kind of lengthy and not a fun thing to try to recreate under the gun, right? So if you had that handy, it would be a good idea to keep that. So if you called our support guys and said, okay, our server just completely crashed, but I have a copy of the database and I have a copy of the registry keys, they can get you back up and running again, and in fairly short order. So some suggestions there. And of course, if you've got a virtual machine, take snapshots from time to time. If you're running virtual environments, I'm hopeful that you know some of the great ups and downs of using virtual environments and that you're taking advantage of those, and off-site storage whenever possible. In the event that you lose something catastrophic in your data center and you lose a lot of information, being able to go back somewhere and pick that up is a very handy thing. So contacting our Pharos support guys in the event of a disaster, we're going to be really hopeful that you have some way to, or some sort of a plan that you can recover from. The last thing we want to hear as well, our only all-in-one Pharos server just caught fire, and we need you guys to help us get back up and running, right? Well, they can help you get the system back installed, but it doesn't mean that they're going to sit there and work with you for reconfiguring every printer, every release station. Have that documented. Have a backup of your database. Have this information handy. It will make that support go a whole lot better. And again, back to the cross-training thing, because I could tell you a horror story that I ended up with where a fair portion of an IT department just up and left, and the other guys that were left there did not know anything about the system. But it was running. They weren't thinking much of it. Well, a few months later, it wasn't running. And they called me directly. Actually, they were calling everybody because they just were looking for someone to grab onto. Please help us. Our system is down. And they didn't even, the other folks that were there hadn't even told these people which physical device in the data center was running this system. They couldn't tell whether it was running or not running. It was not there physically on the network. So cross-training is at least to a certain level, is very helpful. You should have other people in your IT department that you can, hopefully, unless you're really small, cross-train to some extent, at least so that they're familiar with the products enough to find it. And likewise, learn about the other systems and document it. So again, back to the system resilience. We all have heard the phrase "hope for a plan," or "hope for the best, plan for the worst." And I always think of that as weather, right? You're going to go to a picnic, and we're hoping for the best, but we're taking an umbrella just in case. Well, in this case, we have a little more that we can work with here because we know how bad it can be. We know what we can do. So plan for the best, plan for the worst. And don't just hope your system's healthy. Design it that way. Make it that way. Keep it healthy. Be prepared for adversity. Be prepared to plan for your recovery. And prepare to be resilient.